Hi, it's Michael Weber here with my very special guest and dear friend, Michael Unger, Broadway veteran, but also currently the artistic director of Milwaukee's extraordinary Skylight Music Theatre. Michael is the director of our upcoming Chicago premiere of Ernest Shackleton Loves Me. And I called him and said, hey, let's have a little talk about the show so we can introduce it to Chicago audiences. Hi, Michael.
Hi, Michael. Thanks. That's a lovely introduction. Who is that person you're talking about?
Well, it's all true. It's all true. So we could not be more excited, not only to be doing Ernest Shackleton Loves Me, but have you here at Porchlight Music Theatre for the very first time. You have been a director all over the country, and so we're glad to get you back in Chicago, where you have a long history, going all the way back to the old Steppenwolf days, and you've got a lot of friends here.
I was born and bred in Chicago. Grew up in Highland Park, and I was an intern, mascot, gopher at Steppenwolf the very first day they moved into the basement of the church in Highland Park and painted that 88-seat theater black.
Oh, my God. So all of this.
Fun fact, Gary Sinise and Terry Kinney used to beat me up in the parking lot as the preparation when they went on stage like screaming maniacs for the first production they did as Steppenwolf in that incarnation. The play was Indy Wants the Bronx. So well, I was their preparation.
An actor prepares, and you
yes.
You're the source of it. But let's talk about Ernest Shackleton Loves Me. This is an amazing show. Now, we're introducing it here in Chicago. It's never been done here, but it has been a success elsewhere. And take us back to the beginning. How did the show develop? Where did it?
Sure. So my introduction to the show came at the world premiere production at George Street Playhouse. I was then, before I came to Skylight in Milwaukee, I was the associate artistic director and director of education of the York Theater, which is an off-Broadway company that does only musicals in New York. And they sent me happily to see Ernest Shackleton Loves Me at George Street, because there was some interest in doing the show at the York. And I took my son. I was blown away by the show. I mean, at every level, from the acting to the music to the quirkiness to the storytelling to the imagination and the video, which is an element that is completely mind-blowing, because the footage that you see projected behind the scenes or behind the scenery on the screen or sail or whatever the projection surface is literal footage that was shot by a photographer who was on the ship with Shackleton through the entire journey. The fact that the footage survived is a miracle. The fact that the people survived is a miracle. So that footage is authentic. So there's this incredible, stunning, magnificent authenticity to that footage. But anyway, it turned out it was a little, I think, too big to keep that epic scale at the York Theater. So it didn't end up happening there. It ended up happening at second stage in a very successful off-Broadway production. Then they did a Broadway HD version with one of the original writers, Val Vigoda, played Cat, and Wade McCollum played Shaq in other parts. And it's a spectacular, wonderful performance if you want to catch it on Broadway HD. But better to catch it live at Porchlight, of course.
So take us a little bit, just give us a thumbnail. Who is Sir Ernest Shackleton? What is generally that story? I know a lot of people like, I kind of know that, something with the South Pole or something,
Yeah, I think Shackleton is probably one of the most exciting explorers to have existed because of his fortitude and how he saved all of his men. That's a spoiler alert. So he wanted to be the first to hit the South Pole, but he was beaten out by Amundsen or some other explorers. So he decided what his goal was going to be was to traverse the Antarctic by way of the South Pole, the first person to actually go across the continent from ocean to ocean. And, he started on December 5th, 1914. And by January 18th, just a month later, the ship, the Endurance, got stuck in pack ice, and it drifted for months, and it was crushed and sank. So there were 28 men on board, and they all survived by being on ice floes for a while. Then they finally drifted to an island, and they were on an island for a while, but there was no hope of rescue. No one knew where they were. There were no radios. There was no communication. World War I was going on. They barely knew about it. At the very beginning, Winston Churchill told Shackleton to continue with the exploration when Shackleton offered to, sort of sideline it to be part of the war effort, but the war, happened really without them knowing. Anyway, so it's an incredible story of fortitude and survival, impossible odds, like literally impossible odds. They spent almost 2 years on the ice, and Shackleton ended up going with 5 other explorers, 5 of his men, in a rowboat, like a lifeboat that they had sort of built up the sides to be a little more seaworthy, and they traveled for like a month to try and get to an island that had a whaling station, but they arrived because of the way the currents were on the wrong side of the island. So they had to traverse for 3 days over the glacier. These were sailors. They were not like land explorers or glacial explorers. And one of the guys was too sick to make the journey. So he finally got to the whaling station. They found a boat. They went back to pick up the guy. And then they headed back towards out where the men were staying stranded. And the first boat failed. The second boat failed. The third boat failed. The fourth boat finally succeeded in going back to rescue all 22 of the men who were stranded on that island. It's just a remarkable story.
What thrilled me about this show is that it is not strictly a musical of that story itself. The centerpiece, that whole story is part of it, but really the centerpiece and the heart of the show is a contemporary story about this single mom who is trying to just make it in life. And then there's this whole other element.
Yeah,
it's almost like a Twilight Zone episode with Shackleton that becomes part.
Well, that's where the genius of these writers come in. Joe DiPietro, Val Vigoda, and Brendan Milburn, they came up with this incredible center story that Shackleton sort of enters into. So it's about an out-of-work single mom, so avant-garde composer. Her boyfriend's off on the road, or the father of her child, they're not really together anymore, is off on the road being kind of a deadbeat boyfriend or ex-boyfriend. And she, is very keen on computer and music and sort of digital creation. And through some odd chance of weather and electronics, she goes on a dating site and connects with some explorers that you would not expect her to connect to, one of whom is Ernest Shackleton. And they start this sort of romance, improbable romance. It's through, she's modern day, he's early 1900s, so it crosses time and space and continents and glaciers and Brooklyn and a cold apartment with no heat. And it really is about the sacrifices we make as artists and explorers, because she's making great sacrifices for her music, for her art, and trying to help her bring up her son in very difficult circumstances. And so they end up helping each other. She, from the modern day, helps him keep the strength to rescue his men and not give up. And he helps her come to terms with her creativity and how she can really make this on her own and make this new kind of art that will help her, go through some of the challenges she's experiencing. So it's this very improbable connection of very different kinds of people that is so masterfully crafted to become this beautiful story. You cannot not fall in love with either of these characters. And
the music is not only epic and astonishingly beautiful, but the actors also play instruments and participate in the music making live on stage.
Yeah, this is not an easy show to cast because the woman playing Cat. So Val Vigoda, who played Cat originally and who wrote the lyrics, she actually is a fabulous virtuosic violinist. And so she wrote the role for herself and played it herself. She actually plays a violin called the Viper, which is sort of a V-shaped violin so that you can have it on your shoulder. And I think she had 6 strings. Mm-hmm. They make Vipers in 4, 5, 6, and 7 strings. Anyway, but you can also, the violin will stay on your shoulder when you're not holding it, because while she's playing violin, she also has to play piano and sing. She also has to play banjo. And she plays through the show. The music director is really running computers more than anything else. So most of the music does come from that character live. And the guy playing Shackleton has to play banjo and guitar. So it's a very difficult show to cast. And we've cast with 2 wonderful local Chicago actors who are incredibly talented and just like total unicorns. And also we have some standbys for them who are also unicorns. So that's, when you pick this show, you got to make sure you can cast it. Yeah. Otherwise you're sunk.
Well, we're so lucky because we have an amazing pool of actors in Chicago, but this show still, it wasn't for everybody. You really do need to find very unique people who can do all of this, who can act historical characters and play music and be in a rom-com, and, it's all, and be funny and be tragic. It's all the things. I loved the production that you did in Wisconsin at Skylight Musicals, but the production that you are directing for us here in Chicago will be your own vision of the show. So what can Chicago audiences expect in the experience that they're going to get at Porchlight?
Well, they will get an exciting, romantic, modern musical that has characters you just cannot help but connect with. They'll get a historical perspective of perhaps the most thrilling explorer experience in the last 100 years, 150 years, but most of all, it is such an intimate telling of this human experience, and the massive and epic events are brought down to a very personal, interpersonal, human relationship in a very confined setting. It's in her Brooklyn apartment. Now, of course, we do sort of expand to the Antarctic, and the set is sort of symbolic of the ship and has all these elements where she is, as much in the ship as in her apartment. He's as much in her apartment as he's in the ship. But it does sort of go back in time and we get to the Antarctic. But one of the very thrilling elements of it is the photography by Frank Hurley, who was a very renowned Australian photographer who was on the Endurance with Shackleton, with the whole crew. And when they were faced with the choice of unloading so much weight to when the ship sank, he had to decide what negatives he would keep. And these are not like little film negatives that weigh nothing. These are glass plate negatives, like 8x10, that are super heavy. So he had to leave behind some of the magnificent images he took with still camera, but he did not leave behind the footage, the film footage. So we have literal footage from a film that he made called South. That's a documentary of this experience. And you see literally the ship as it sort of takes off. You see literally the ship trapped in ice. You literally see the beams and the mast breaking. I mean, this is all footage that he captured while there, and it made it back. It's just, it is such a cool story.
That he had that insight then. I mean, the idea of going, what if you had film of being able to see the Titanic sink? If somebody just happened to have their movie camera going,
yeah, exactly.
The improbability of it. And of course, the Endurance being discovered just last year.
A year ago, right.
A year ago, at the bottom of the ocean, intact. I mean, it brings this whole story to even the present day here in 2023.
It sure does. And this production will be the first production in the world since they found the Endurance at the bottom of the Weddell Sea. Yeah. And I think part of the reason that Shackleton brought Hurley on board was because they hoped to make some money after the fact by doing an exhibition of the expedition. Yeah. So it would have the film and the footage, but they did not expect it to turn out the way it did, of course.
Well, Michael Unger, we are so excited to have you at Porchlight and have your vision for Ernest Shackleton Loves Me available for our audiences to experience and to enjoy. It's an amazing show. We're grateful to be able to present it here, and we're just delighted to have you heading the team. So everybody, come and see Ernest Shackleton Loves Me.
I want to show you the shirt I wore for today.
Come, show us your swag.
I wore my Shackleton shirt. See?
Were they selling that?
I'm so excited to be at Porchlight. Sorry, what?
I said, were they selling that in the Endurance gift shop on the?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know where I found it, but I'm so excited to come to Porchlight. I grew up in Chicago. I worked in Chicago, but I don't think Porchlight. I didn't know about Porchlight when I had left for New York, which was decades ago. So the renown is incredible. The work you've done there is amazing. I saw Cabaret. It was just beyond phenomenal. So I'm really excited to give the audience a completely different perspective from other shows that they've seen there. In terms of the scenery will blow your mind, just like Cabaret did. It's a real transformation, and it's gonna be a great experience and fun. It's such a fun show.
It is. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you at Ernest Shackleton Loves Me.